Hello friends and welcome to our channel. Today's video is about when workers began demolishing a house, they exposed a historical secret hidden in the walls. But before we start, please make sure you subscribe if you haven't already, hit the notification bell and smash that like button. We really appreciate your continuous support. A demolition crew has gathered to accomplish what seemed a simple task. The moment the group started working, they noticed something strange about the property's white siding. So the wrecking crew decided to take a closer look. And to their surprise, they found out that this house hides a historic street that has been concealed for centuries. This house is located in Prescott, Arkansas, a small city that holds about 4,000 people, according to the 2010 census. However, this city had been a well-known spot on the map of the United States in the past, thanks to its great geographical location. It sat on the Prairie d'Anne, which was first colonized by the French and officially incorporated in 1874. However, these lands have a more interesting past to tell about them. Part of it was discovered by this demolition crew in 2019. Thus, their discovery added more knowledge about the history of Prescott and the whole nation. Before Prescott was an official city in the United States, French colonists claimed the area Prairie d'Anne. Its name means donkey meadow. It was such a strange place, surrounded by a thick forest of pine trees and extended for about 20 miles. The Prairie d'Anne had such an important geographical position in the past when pro-slavery Arkansas seceded from the U.S. and then joined the Confederate States of America. At that time, state leaders had to move their dealings from Union-held Little Rock to Washington, Arkansas, which became the makeshift capital. If you have traveled west from Prairie d'Anne, you'd reach Washington. Trekking east led to Camden, and if you head south, you'll find yourself in the Red River, which proved a strategic passageway. Venturing even further in that direction would see people through Shreveport and Dallas. When the Union Army took over Little Rock, Prairie d'Anne became an important piece of land for the Confederacy. As a result, Southern soldiers fled the former capital and began to build defensive works that reached Washington. It was quite impossible for the Confederacy to construct adequate defensive positions across all of the prairie land simply because it was too large. However, the Prairie d'Anne was part of the territory between the Union and the Confederates' new capital in Washington. So, this location was a clear pathway between these foes' hubs. Consequently, the Battle of Prairie d'Anne started between these two on April 9, 1864. Union and Confederate soldiers' fight started just south of Prescott and lasted for 4 days over the 20-mile stretch of prairie land. Eventually, the Union forces were the winners of the Battle of Prairie d'Anne, and as a result, their leader, Frederick Steele, decided to march his troops toward Camden. That's because they needed supplies, which weren't available in the fortified city to the prairie's east. After that, their leader then took his troops back to their base at the captured city of Little Rock. However, the tragedies didn't end here, as reaching their final destination resulted in one of the bloodiest fights during the Civil War, the Battle of Jenkins Ferry, which lasted for 2 days. And again, the Union forces emerged victorious and returned to their well-protected Arkansas seat. Less than a year later, General Robert E. Lee of the Confederacy was defeated again and surrendered at the Battle of Appomattox Courthouse. Subsequently, the rest of the Confederate generals across the country followed him and surrendered too. This resulted in the Union's Ulysses S. Grant being victorious and in both the battle and the Civil War. The end of the Civil War paved a road before a new era in U.S. history called Reconstruction. During this time, all slaves went free, and the country had to literally rebuild after years of war. Although not a significant landmark in Reconstruction-era developments, Prescott received its official platting in 1873. In the case of the small city on the Prairie d'Anne, this meant penciling in a train station for the then-in-construction Cairo and Fulton Railroad. The building of this railroad helped Prescott grow into a crowded city. Its original layout featured 48 blocks split down the middle by the Cairo and Fulton tracks. Thus, local merchants relied on this method of transport to move their products in and out of town, which helped businesses too. During the Reconstruction era, Prescott witnessed many other achievements and several important firsts. For example, the city got its first newspaper in 1875, and after only 2 years, it cut the ribbon on its first post office. In 1877, the county seat moved to Prescott, highlighting the metropolis's importance to the area. Therefore, Prescott became a governmental and legal hub. At the end of the 20th century, telephone lines and a water and light plant arrived. At the same time, timber, cotton, and peaches became a big industry for the city. All of this was exported out of the town via train. However, everything changes over time, and nothing stays as it is. Nowadays, fewer than 4,000 people live in Prescott. The city covers 6.5 square miles with a population density of about 565 people per square mile. Nonetheless, not all the buildings in town are inhabited. Taking, for instance, this crew that attempted to remove one such home from the landscape. This home you see in the picture was located in Prescott's Greenlawn Avenue. From the outside, it looked like any ordinary house. White siding covering its exterior, and the abode having a simple rectangular shape. Its facade had 4 windows and a front door, too. It likely seemed like an easy teardown to the crew in charge. With the crew starting to deconstruct the home, they noticed something strange. The white siding on the home's exterior covered the bones of the dwelling. This structure held a secret long forgotten. Indeed, the house contained a massive local history piece. Specifically, taking off the Prescott home layers revealed that it had been built around the structure of another, much older house. It was a log cabin that measured only 18 feet by 20 feet. Later experts found out that the history of this place may trace back to the start of Prescott itself. The Nevada County Depot and Museum decided to look into the uncovered cabin's lengthy history. Eventually, the researchers discovered that the structure hadn't always sat on Greenlawn Street. Someone must have moved the whole structure to its final location, specifically between 1933 and 1955. Along the way, too, someone had changed the layout of the abode. The cabin itself was too small, measuring in at less than 400 square feet. In an October 2019 Facebook post, the museum explained how its footprint had changed over time. The cabin had been added onto the exterior encapsulated with siding, staff wrote. After the museum's experts dug in the land ownership records, a lot more was revealed about the log cabin's past. Originally, the home stood on Prescott's Miller Hill. Moreover, records showed that a man named John Bond owned the land between 1850 and 1860. This information gave a good clue as to when the cabin was built. Interestingly, Vaughn's land's location seemed to be near one of Prescott's most famous landmarks, the Prairie de Anne battlefield, meaning that the cabin's inhabitants might have witnessed a significant Civil War battle. The materials used to build the cabin are somehow unique, as resources changed when trains started arriving in the Reconstruction era. The museum's experts wrote, it is made of hand-honed timbers and predates the coming of the railroad in the 1870s, which brought sawn lumber. The museum also claimed that the historic cabin is now in good hands. Staff also shared that a local donor granted them enough money to buy it. All of this so they could disassemble it, store it, and one day rebuild it alongside the Prairie de Anne battlefield where it once stood. Moving the cabin hasn't been an easy task, though. Once the museum made its intentions clear, many started arguing about its ownership. Because of this problem, the organization couldn't take over the structure, deconstruct it, or put it on display for the world to see. However, the museum had to follow a quite careful procedure to take the cabin down. One of the organization's members even made a call for volunteers to help. He said that they need a lot of people to help because they have to tear this down piece by piece, label it, store it, and then later reassemble it. After the log cabin's news spread, the local and online community shared their joy over the discovery. Most of them were amazed by how the home's previous owners had inadvertently preserved history by updating the exterior. A Facebook user wrote, "It is in magnificent condition." Others were interested in the exquisite cabin details that the museum had missed at first. For example, one person noted, "If you zoom in, you can see the square nails that were used." So much history hidden from the public's eye. Many viewers appreciated the discovery of such an impressive landmark too. Someone wrote, "Now this is news I love seeing, the history in our country." Another complimented the museum's efforts in protecting the cabin, saying, "Thank you for saving this building." It is a wonderful piece of history that will live on. Nonetheless, this wasn't meant as the only remnant of its kind to have been uncovered in this way. A Facebook user reported that their house had the same Civil War-era infrastructure. Mainly, they claimed that their home had been built with the same kind of timber. He added there is a straw mixed with mud packed between the logs. The walls of this house are about 10 inches thick. Another similar discovery reached the media in 2017 when Kevin Kemp and Jennifer Alexander had big plans to tear down their property in Dublin, Ohio. The project was to build a new one in its place. However, before that, Kemp noticed something unusual when he began to pull wood paneling from the walls. Kemp and his friend Larry Daniels was there to help with the project. According to the local daily newspaper, the Columbus Dispatch, the homeowner shouted to Daniels as he peeled back layers of wood paneling. Kemp said, "We pulled off one of the pieces of paneling and I said, 'Larry, that's a log.' We pulled off another and I said, 'My God, this is a log cabin.'" To find an ancient residence inside his home was like a dreamlike experience for Kemp. He said to Fox News, "You're not ready to see a log cabin inside a modern home, and it looks like just over time it was forgotten." Therefore, experts went to uncover the secret cabin's history. Tom Holton, Dublin Historical Society member, shared their findings with the Columbus Dispatch. He stated that the cabin was measured in at 30 feet by 25 feet, and it had remained untouched since its construction, which apparently took place in the years between 1820 and 1840. The records relating to the cabin shows its first owner, A. Maddies, who lived there in 1856. Upon the discovery, Kemp and Alexander realized their reconstruction project couldn't go as planned. They wanted to take and preserve the historic building, so they reached out to city officials instead. Unfortunately, the couple hadn't received any money in exchange for their find, yet they were nonetheless hopeful that the move would help meet the costs of their renovation plans. Antebellum cabins aren't the only ones that have popped back up either, as someone found a Civil War-era cannonball stuck in a tree that stood outside of the Overfelt Johnston House in Independence, Missouri. Once the century-old tree had been cut down, many historic secrets were discovered. In 2019, more Civil War-era relics were churned up by one of the most devastating storms in the Atlantic Ocean's history. After Hurricane Dorian passed through South Carolina, a pair of wartime cannonballs emerged on the beach. Each paints a clearer picture of a life that dates back to 100 years in the past. This is another reason why the Prescott cabin is such a unique find. The museum's Facebook post concluded that the discovery was a great find of Prescott's history. However, this is not the only tale of a fantastic discovery concealed inside a building. The owner of an old house in Scotland noticed something strange blocking the chimney, so a man decided to reach inside the flue and pulled out what looked like a crumbled ball of rags. He nearly threw them away, but something stopped him at the last minute. Could this piece of trash be someone else's treasure? The story began when the man was renovating his home in Aberdeen, Scotland. He never thought that he would make such a startling discovery. While working on the old chimney, he found what seemed to be a ball covered in old fabric. Judging by the object's shape, it looked as if someone had stuffed it up the chimney on purpose. Now, however, it was difficult to tell why it was placed there. Of course, the man could not identify it, so he considered tossing it into the trash at first. Luckily, he had a change of heart and decided to take it to the local museum instead. Once at the National Library of Scotland in Edinburgh, the object certainly didn't look like much. However, researchers later realized that this might be an incredible find. Conservationists at the library quickly concluded that this humble bundle of rags was, in fact, a map that dates back to the late 17th century. Besides, experts believed it would have previously have been a great status symbol for its owner. Earlier in the 17th century, maps were seen as desirable possessions and a sign of great wealth. The discovered object was no different. It measures 7 feet long by 5 feet wide. The chimney map would have once been given the pride of place in its owner's home. The object was apparently produced by a map maker named George Wildey in London, England. Nevertheless, George was known for copying maps drafted originally by others, and the origins of the chimney map are thought to have lain in Amsterdam, Netherlands. Experts believe that the map was a copy of one made by Schenk and Valk, who were famous map makers in the 17th century. This piece was formed from 8 separate sheets of paper and created to be hung on a wall. It would have required a vast space to be displayed appropriately. To include an original touch on his copied map, Wilde added illustrations of famous people and places around the edges. Amazingly, experts were able to carefully restore these details and provide an enthralling insight into life more than 300 years ago. Thanks to William III of England and his wife Mary being present on the map, researchers determined it dates back to 1690. Initially, they theorized that the king's religious beliefs might have caused the map to be hidden away. However, the map's value faded through the years despite being previously a sign of wealth and power. As the world around it changed, its significance would have decreased. Anyway, although no one knows how and why this map ended up in Aberdeen, the National Library of Scotland staff were happy that it did. After a challenging restoration process, they were able to restore the map to its previous state. Conservator Claire Thompson reported that the restoration was the most challenging job she had ever handled. Much of the paper had been lost, she told Discover magazine in 2016, and the remainder was hard and brittle in places and soft and thin in others. Unfortunately, the canvas base that had been attached to the map had severely deteriorated. Due to the fabric and the papers reacting differently to the environment over time, the map had ended up in terrible shape. Despite all these obstacles, Thompson and her team managed to unroll the map carefully and split it into smaller segments to begin conservation work. They first started attaching the pieces to a temporary backing and using a humidifier to gradually reintroduce moisture to the paper's fibers. As the paper became less dry, the team could smoothly pry open the map's remaining creases and folds. Subsequently, the team carefully put every piece in its correct position. Hence, the full picture was starting to clear out. Finally, they suspended each section in the water for 40 minutes at a temperature of 104 degrees. You might think that this destroys the fragile documents. However, it helped to remove dirt from the paper while preserving the intricate designs intact. Gladly, the restoration was a success. What had previously looked messy and dirty revealed to be a fascinating and detailed work of art. The refined map features various scenes of exploration and glorious sea battles, in addition to far-off regions such as South America. Currently, the map takes pride of place once more. This time it is displayed in the National Library of Scotland, making it the pride of one of the world's largest cartographic collections. Sometimes it's the most unremarkable-looking things that hold the most fascinating stories to tell. Another example could be this other seemingly ordinary find, which also took place in Scotland. This item looked like nothing more than a creased paper parcel when the museum workers discovered it. Nevertheless, it turned out to be something far rarer and more valuable. Dr. Margaret Maitland was doing some work at the National Museum of Scotland in Edinburgh when she came across an unremarkable-looking package wrapped in brown paper. At first, the object didn't look very promising, yet she decided to unwrap it anyway. The moment she did, she found a bundle of old fabric in addition to an envelope dating back to World War II. Inside the envelope was a journal written in the 1940s by a previous collector. Besides, it was when Dr. Maitland read the journal that her interest was aroused. The journal stated that the contents of the unprepossessing box existed in ancient Egypt. However, the contents found inside had actually come from the burial tomb. Now, Dr. Maitland realized that she might be onto something exciting. Something that had been neglected for almost 80 years. After the museum's conservators assessed the fabric, they realized that it's so old and fragile and needs careful treatment to ensure it wasn't damaged. The first thing to do was humidifying the material, making the cloth less brittle and more comfortable to handle. Next, they had to unfold the fabric painstakingly, and this procedure alone took about 24 hours to complete. During this process, the museum team became really excited. Dr. Maitland later told the NMS website, "We could see tantalizing glimpses of colorful painted details." When the fabric was finally unfolded, the conservators realized that they'd come across something of great rarity and historical value. Dr. Maitland declared, "None of us could have imagined the remarkable figure that would greet us when we were finally able to unroll it." Dr. Maitland said, describing the exceptional find, "The shroud is a very rare object in superb condition. It is executed in a highly unusual artistic style suggestive of Roman period Egyptian art, yet still very distinctive. The shroud is remarkably intact. It is one of the very few artifacts from the Roman era, which started around 30 BC. It also consists of linen, that had been painted, representing the Egyptian deity Osiris, the god of the underworld and the afterlife. Once the object had been identified, Dr. Maitland and her colleagues could examine the shroud in more detail. Deciphering hieroglyphics on the shroud allowed them to identify the person who'd been wrapped in it, a man named Amenka. He was the son of two important officials, Mansuif and his wife Tanuet, from the Roman era in Egypt. Meanwhile, conservator Lynn McLean recalled that the team had come across brown paper stuck to its back while examining the shroud, which was moistened to be carefully extracted. McLean said what we found under the head were layers of the original mummy wrapping that had obviously come away when the shroud was taken off the body. Moreover, and coincidentally, the museum's collection already included artifacts from the tomb of the couple, Mansuif and Tanuet. One of them is a gold mask of the former. Dr. Maitland noted it is extraordinarily rare that we have such an incredible group of objects belonging to a whole ancient Egyptian family in our collections. The researchers were now ready to date the shroud because they had enough knowledge about Amika's parents. It is already known that Mansuif and Tanuet had died in 9 BC, meaning the shroud must have been made early in the 1st century AD. In addition to Mansuif's golden mask, the museum also holds a golden sheath that would have belonged to him and was buried with him 2,000 years ago. Dr. Maitland revealed that this wreath symbolized a defeat of death. The tomb of the family remained sealed and undisturbed until it was excavated in 1857. Another interesting artifact from the same crypt includes funerary papyrus documents. They provide detailed records of the mummification process, funeral rituals, and histories of the couple's lives. Seemingly, the wife passed away just 48 days after her husband's death. Although the family's burial has been authoritatively dated to the early part of the 1st century AD, their tomb was much older than that. Located near Thebes' ancient city, Luxor today, the crypt was actually built more than 1,000 years earlier. It was constructed not long after the reign of the Egyptian pharaoh Tutankhamun. During this time, when the Egyptian empire was at its peak of power and wealth, powerful officials seemingly competed on the honor of having the most extravagant and lavishly decorated tombs. Another motive for creating these sumptuous tombs was the belief that human wealth could be brought to the afterlife. At the time, bodies were mummified, but their guts removed and stored separately in special vessels. When this tomb was first built, it was actually the chief of police and his wife's final resting place. Also, a magnificent statue of the couple was found in the tomb. It would have seemingly served as a home for the dead's spirits. Moreover, the chief of police, or Medjay, had to protect the tombs near ancient Thebes. Dr. Maitland said, describing the tomb's rituals, people would go and present offerings to a statue of their deceased relatives. All this so that they would have the food and drink they needed to be able to live forever. Between 1290 BC and the 1st century AD, the crypt would have been reused many times. However, it subsequently remained untouched for about 2 millennia, until Victorian archaeologists excavated it. Later, the excellently conserved shroud was displayed in a museum for 80 years. History lovers worldwide would be so glad that such an incredible find has finally been rediscovered. Thanks for watching. If you liked today's video, don't forget to leave a thumbs up, subscribe to our channel, and click on that notification bell so you never miss any new stories.